Namaste, Tim.
Namaste.
Joy to see you here.
Welcome to my Nepali home.
तपाईँ त नेपालको ज्वाइँ साहब हो नि हैन? सनी ल
I am a Nepalko join.
त्यही त. How much Nepali you can speak?
You know, I understand more than I can speak. I listen to it a lot, especially I am a Nepali join of a proud Gurung family from Dunche, Rasua. And so they speak Nepali around me, I hear it. But constructing sentences is more difficult for me.
But you can understand, right?
Yeah, enough.
If I ask a question in Nepali, will you understand it?
I'll tell you if I don't.
Okay, say for example, let's try this.
Yeah.
तपाईको जिन्दगीको विषयमा भन्नुस् न आफ्नो.
No.
Okay, Tim. Tell me about your life.
You know, I'm an Englishman. I grew up around the London area. And I left school very early. I left school at 16, the equivalent of SLC, SEE. And I went straight into technology. I was a teenage computer programmer, and I went to work for financial institutions in London and worked my way up. Eventually became an investment banker myself, and I've lived all over the world. I obviously in London, in New York, in Portugal, in Singapore, in Kuala Lumpur, and of course in Kathmandu.
You started with technology, right?
As probably about 12 years old, on the early Commodore 64 computers, this is the 1980s,
Okay.
I taught myself programming.
What impact the study of technology later had in your life when you see in the retrospect,
Yeah.
Say, for example, I studied engineering and later switched on to liberal arts. I'm a dropout from an engineering school. I sometimes think about the impact. In your case?
It's definitely retrospective, right? You didn't know it when you're 14 years old. But if you look at my career and how technology is now underpinning everything we're doing. So I started as a programmer and a network engineer. I then became a banker, but a banker to technology companies. And then fast forward to what I'm doing here in Nepal, investing in Nepali technology companies as well as others. And I have a deeper understanding. I think you have to have an element of understanding of the underlying technology to know how a business will run and how it will affect communities. So for me, it's been incredibly helpful. I don't want to claim that I foresaw that, but it has been an incredibly helpful thread throughout my career.
Yeah. When I started learning television, ages back, I think I'm the last one surviving. We never thought that the world would become so much visual as it is today. Tim, when you look in the retrospect now, what are the advantages and the disadvantages of being a tech guy?
It's hard to see the disadvantages. I think you need to. The advantage is a level of understanding as things change, so technology itself and the impacts on society change so fast. We're moving at an exponential rate of change. I do think what's important with technology is to understand the human impact. There are fantastic human impacts. Fintech, bringing the unbanked into the banking, the convenience, especially during lockdowns of food delivery and other deliveries. So the fantastic benefits, but there are also big challenges ahead around data security, hacking, some of the problems online with social media and online bullying. So I think you have to go beyond an understanding of the technology and think about the human impact, both good and bad.
Talking about the human impact, If you are a tech guy, does it make your thinking or life particularly confined to a way of looking at things because the technology has set rules,
Yeah.
and the life itself is so profound. That's why I was thinking that, in a way, can technology make a person's mind a little bit smaller than the life it is and just be confined to?
I don't think there's any such thing as a tech guy. I think.
I haven't
If I'm
interviewed.
anything, what am I? I'm a tech guy, a finance guy, an Englishman, and a Pally join. I'm a a sort of global
So that's why I'm
citizen.
looking for a composite answer.
Exactly. No, I don't think so. It depends on the individual. If your life is dominated by engineering thoughts, then perhaps. But I don't think I'm one of those people. I think technology is just one input to humanity, one facilitator of humanity, and we're at the beginning of a industrial revolution. They call it the fourth industrial revolution, the digital revolution. And I want to bring a comparison to the original industrial revolution. So the steam engines, the factories of the 18th century in the UK, they did a lot of good. They brought a lot of employment. They brought a lot of productivity and wealth. They also brought, now we look back, and it's brought climate change. It brought problems in the workplace, health and safety in the workplace. It also brought global inequality. So those countries in the West that had the factories and the investment were doing very well, but they started to exploit the poorer countries. I don't think the inventor of the steam engine forethought those problems. And I think we need to be very careful today with the technology revolution that we will experience huge benefits, but we will also encounter problems that we don't even know yet.
When you say that the guy who invented the steam engine never calculated the damage
Climate change, for example.
Climate change,
Yeah.
for example. Right. To what level an invention is morally responsible for the damages that occur in course of time?
I don't think that unless there is an intent, if I invent the nuclear bomb, that you could argue a morality because you clearly know the intent that is used for. I think the inventor of a steam engine, the inventor of artificial intelligence, the inventor of the web, did not have a malicious intent with those inventions. They had a socially positive intent. And so the implications as these technologies get used more and more are not necessarily the inventor's responsibility. It's our responsibility. It's society's responsibility.
Yeah, technology in a way is neutral, right?
It is.
How we use it and for what
It's
purpose.
like radio, TV, magazines. It's a medium.
Yeah, yeah. You lived in so many cities which you described. Do
Yeah.
you have any favorite or a disdain for a particular city you lived?
I have no disdain. I would say that I love ancient cultures. And so the two places that I've enjoyed living the most are my homeland, the UK, and Nepal, both of which are ancient cultures. And you can see that in the day-to-day depth of society and individuals. Now I'm based more in the UK, but we are here a lot. For 2015 to 18, we were based here, but in the UK a lot during the earthquake. And I think we've enjoyed them both equally.
You have lived in other cities also before
Yeah.
you came to Nepal.
Yes, Singapore, Kuala Lumpur before we came here.
Can you make a comparison?
Definitely.
Can you describe those cities in a word or line? If I tell you Singapore,
Clinical.
Kuala Lumpur,
Slightly less clinical and more Asian.
New York,
Rugged. Raw. Fun.
Portugal,
Graceful.
Moscow,
Hard-edged.
Kathmandu,
Free flow, libertarian,
London.
ancient, living history.
Can you make a comparison between Singapore, which is a clinical, so methodological,
Yes.
almost like electronic chips, 01, to Kathmandu, which has its own way, whether you can call it a craziness or a grossly disorganized, and within this disorganization, disorder, there seems to be some order if you have a patience to look at it.
If somebody, having lived in both, if somebody said, Tim, you have an option, you have a job, it's equal pay, equal everything, but you can live in Kathmandu or Singapore, I would definitely choose Kathmandu. And the reason for that, look, Singapore was wonderful for us. We were married there, we had 2 children there. My wife worked in the Gocher contingent for the Gurkhas in Singapore. And that's how we met here, but we were married there. And so we've got wonderful memories, but it was lacking a soul. It was so clinical and well organized that I didn't connect to its soul. But Kathmandu, and this is why I say I love ancient societies, even America's a little modern for me, but in the UK, in France, in Germany, in Portugal, in Nepal, Kathmandu, there is a real deep soul to the people. And that's what I personally connect to. A lot of people would prefer the much better organized life. Personally, I rather like, what would I call it? I say libertarian. What I mean by that is there's very little organization. It's actually quite free to the people to live how they want. And personally, I find that liberating.
Some cities and some people that I have come across, they're so clinical, they're so perfect, But I wouldn't go for that, a little bit of, messiness is...
I think that's right. And that you asked me about Kuala Lumpur, and that was the same. So it does have the skyscrapers and good roads, but it's also got, a really good little India, a little bit of grubbiness, a little bit of real life, a little bit of Asia. And to be honest, I even preferred Kuala Lumpur to Singapore because it was more real.
Yeah, ages back again, was in Kuala Lumpur taking training of television because headquarters of all television stations in Asia, AIBD, used to be there, in Angkasa-Puri, Not perfect, but still, I would prefer it to Singapore.
That's right. That's
A
right.
little bit of messiness is necessary, I think.
And personally, we're not talking about economics here. We're not talking about practical quality of life. We're talking about something deeper, some deeper connection to a society.
You mentioned that given same job, same salary, I would prefer Kathmandu, right?
Definitely.
But if salary is less than Singapore, much less, would you still prefer Kathmandu?
I think I've done that.
I think, yeah.
When I started Dolma Impact Fund, I chose to not work in Singapore or Kuala Lumpur or London or anywhere I could have worked with a much higher salary. I actually went without salary, any money, for 3 years to start the fund, to raise the money, which was very hard. And when I did raise the fund, my salary is a lot less than it was there. So actually, I'm a living example of somebody who has chosen to earn less money in order to live and do business here.
I heard, or probably I heard you wrong, or probably it was a slip of your tongue when you earlier said that given the same salary, same job, I would prefer Kathmandu,
Yes. I'm talking in general.
Oh, in general.
But you asked me, and I've actually chosen to earn less money to live here. And I would add that most people in our Dolma Impact Fund office have lived abroad, got their degrees abroad, worked abroad, but they've chosen to come back for a lower salary because of that same love for Nepal.
To what level the salary of a person affects quality of his life?
Oh, it's a philosophical question. I think it's a necessary, right? I mean, there is a necessary minimum. If you talk about happiness, one thing Nepal has that I had a deep spiritual awakening on my first trip to Nepal, and that was exactly your question. You know, what level of income do you need to be happy? And what I found is people that in British terms were living in poverty, but they were happy. And I thought, you know, how can that be? Now, poverty did mean they weren't hungry, they had a house, you know, they had the basics. But the level of happiness I experienced here really redefined that question to me. How much money do you need to be happy? And it taught me so much about humanity. What I find is salary is important. If I think about my office or the companies that we invest in, of course salary is important. Of course the money you receive is not only practical, but it gives you a pride in what you do. But it's not the main driver. I think to lead a team, you need to focus on a goal, a social mission. And I think if our mission is to create as many sustainable, well-paying jobs in Nepal as possible, then I think a lot of people bind to that mission. They will take a lower salary in order to come home to achieve that exciting mission together as a team. So there are definitely, why do people become teachers? They're not necessarily the highest paying thing, but they're an enormously socially important role. So there's lots of examples where it's not the most important thing, but of course it's important.
You used a term called, I had a deep spiritual awakening in Nepal in my first trip. Can you explain that?
Yes. I think until I came to Nepal, and I had traveled the developing world, I'd been to India and, lots of places. But I didn't spend much time in Kathmandu. I went right up into Langtang.
When was that?
This was 2003, 19 years ago. And actually I was stuck in a village because it was monsoon. And we couldn't walk the main path to Langtang. So we went off to I had one guide, I was on my own. And we were stuck in this village of Bridim, about 250 people. And they were living a life that had the answers to everything the West was seeking.
Oh my gosh.
Right? So
how they had done?
Sure. We're looking for environmental sustainability. What are they doing in the village of Bridim? They've been there for hundreds of years. They're not chopping down the trees and destroying the landscape because they know there'd be landslides that would destroy their village. They're using organic farming because they don't have fertilizers. They're living a sustainable life with the land because they have to. What are we trying to do in the West with this race to capitalism? We're stressing ourselves out. You wouldn't believe the tension in the air in the UK or the US just to make ends meet, just to pay your rent, pay your mortgage. There's an inner peace. They're practicing meditation, yoga, because they've done it for hundreds of years. They're doing the things which reduce stress, and they have an inner peace. Now, for me, coming to a place which was poor, but was teaching me such fundamental lessons in life, teaching me that actually my own society, where the West has a tendency to think it's exceptional. It's not. There are lots of good things about living in the developed world, and there are lots of bad things like stress, like the climate change that we're causing. And here is a community in the Himalayas on a mountainside which is teaching me the answers to my own society's problems. And that was the moment. That was the moment that I thought these people have taught me so much. And you can't describe a spiritual moment, can you? I can't put that into words. But the light came on, the spark came on, that humanity is one, that every single member of the human race can teach an equal amount to another member of the human race. And from that moment, I think I sort of dedicated myself to the human race.
Which village was this?
Bridim.
Bridim.
And Bridim
Where
was...
it is exactly? I have done Langtang Trek once.
Sure. So Shabrubensi
Yes,
is the starting point for the
Yeah,
Langtang
yeah,
Trek. If you take another path to the left, there's no villages in between, but it's probably a 6-7 hour walk up to the village of Bridim. It's a ethnic
I just
Tibetan
did through
village.
a place called Lama Hotel. It's the same route, no?
It's the same area. It's in the Langtang National
Yeah,
Park,
yeah, same.
but I think the Lama Hotel is on the main
Yeah.
trekking route to Langtang itself.
Many people have walked through that path, including me, the trek which you described.
Yeah.
How come someone realizes and another one just passes by?
I can't answer that question. But what I can say is I'm not alone, right? So after that first trip, it was so impactful on my life that I started the charity Dolma Foundation
Okay.
to give something back to these people that had given me so much. They didn't know they'd given me anything. And we started running Dolma Ecotourism, which is a non-profit tour operator, which runs trips based in the village of Bridim. But then we go trekking up on the yak trails up to the plateaus of the Himalayas. And I am not alone. I would say a great proportion of people that come on those trips have had very similar experiences. Because perhaps they're self-selecting Westerners who are stressed and are looking for a peace, looking for proof that you can live in harmony with nature, in harmony with your society without the stress that we have in the West, and I think they've found it.
You used a very interesting term saying that there is so much of a tension in air in Western world. In London you said it, right? It's not exactly visible, but it is on air, right?
Oh, it's visible. It's visible. Get stuck in a so I'll give you a driving analogy, right? If I am driving and let's say I turn but I hadn't indicated, I would probably, somebody would pull up alongside me, open their window, yell and swear at me. Whereas in Kathmandu, everything's fine. Kegone. Anything goes on the road, right? And you don't have this, that we even have a word for it, road rage. It happens all the time. Another example, my wife was in a supermarket and somebody accidentally bumped the trolley into the person in front. That turned into a physical fight in the suit. It was an accident. I feel that people, especially at the moment with the cost of living crisis, but even before that, people are on the edge because people have to live, at least in the southeast of England, around London, which is very expensive, to live, to survive. You've got to work. You've got to manage your children. Both mother and father have to work. It's much more stressful than it is here.
Living on the edge, is it worth living?
You know, and it depends how you see it, but I think there's many values. I don't want to put... The UK is a fantastic country which has achieved and does achieve many great things and a great quality of
Not
life.
just with the UK, we have people, even in Nepal, in Kathmandu especially, who are living on the edge.
Yes, yes.
Can we go on living life without having a proper philosophical construct, how to look at it? You know, that's the single most important thing in here.
I think capitalism is a wonderful invention like the steam engine, like technology, but it does create social stress and individual stress. Believe it or not, one of the most enlightening talks I've had is with your former interviewee, KP Ollie, who said to me, I want Nepal to develop, but I want it to maintain its peace and happiness. There is a peace and happiness here. And if we're not careful, the urbanization, the capitalism, the stress, of which I confess I am part of, you know, if you don't just want to copy the West, you want to have a Nepali version of development, which retains that happiness and social peace. I don't know how to do that.
I will flip the coin for you now. two interesting phrases you used. There is so much tension in the air in England. And the village I went in Langtang, there was peace on the air, and the people were not using chemical fertilizers.
Yeah.
Do you think that people were not using chemical fertilizer out of choice or out of compulsion? Because the use of chemical fertilizer is increasing in Nepal day by day. So, what is your comment on that?
This is a really important moral question you're asking. The simple answer is they either couldn't afford fertilizers or they weren't available. But I'm talking about a snapshot of that village in, nearly 20 years ago. That village and all villages in Nepal have changed. And I'm neither society, if we are comparing Bridim with London, London has changed too. But with Bridim or many Nepali rural areas, you've seen lots of changes. One is urbanization and depopulation. One is, when I met those people, their life wasn't perfect. And I'm not trying to pretend it is. I'm just saying that the things they did really well were the things I needed to learn. But of course, their life is hard, getting up before sunrise, climbing the mountain to get the water, going to the fields, herding the yak. It's hard. And they wanted their children to go to school. They wanted their children to get an education. They wanted to have a better economic life. So as somebody who founded a charity who could help that, what do I do? What is the morally correct thing to do? Do I help their children go to school? Do I help economic development in the village, knowing that that will change the fabric of the very thing I loved? And I think the answer to that question is we cannot keep people in a museum. If it's the genuine desire of the parents or the community to achieve some development and they fully understand that, only they know what's good for them. It's not for me to say, don't send your children to school because you'll lose your traditional dances. And, that is not for a foreigner or anybody outside of the village to tell them. And so what I hope we have done, Dolma Foundation, is by providing education to their children, is helping their society achieve something about what I said about development by retaining that cultural importance. If you have an uneducated rural society, change will sweep through them like blowing a leaf in the wind. If you have a generation with education, they can somewhat chart their course on their own terms.
That's vital. If I have an ability to judge the wind of changes, then that's a fantastic thing to do. Because the winds of changes will come, whether I like it or
That's
not.
right.
Technology will change.
That's right.
But whether the new technology is good for me or no, whether it will better my life or worsen my life, whether it will make me more peaceful or more what you call stressed.
Yeah.
Even to judge that, I think I must have a basic perspective or outlook towards life, But one question, Tim, that comes to my mind, is so fascinating to talk to you because you have understood, not just seen like a tourist, the fundamental fabrics of changes that are taking places in Nepalese villages. And on top of that, you have married a Nepali, you are a Joisaf, so you can understand things much more better, in much more, not better or worse, in a three-dimensional way, length, breadth and depth, You are not like a textbook academician with no contact with reality. What kind of changes over the years you have seen in Nepalese society? First in rural society, then in urban society. Good and bad.
I think the two most positive changes I've seen are education. There's a lot more education, both government and private. There's a lot more healthcare. Looking at the sort of UN statistics, you
Yeah, our
see
lifespan has
Nepal-
increased.
Absolutely. I think that's very good.
I would be dead by now if I was born a generation back,
That's right. I think where some of the problems occur are the job creation in the private sector, which in most countries is where most of the job growth comes from, has not kept pace with the education.
Oh.
And so that is why you walk around Kathmandu and show me a road that doesn't have a sign saying, get a visa for Australia, move to the UK,
Learn Korean.
Exactly. And so this emigration is something which, I don't know the numbers, but it's huge. How many people are leaving this beautiful country, and not just this beautiful country, but leaving their wives and children and parents to go and earn money because the opportunities are not here. So it's good to have education, it's good to have better healthcare, but the gap is the job creation, the quality job creation in Nepal to keep people here.
It's beautifully put. That's a profound statement you made. I think what you said is so true. The gap between education, the number of educated and the jobs available are the biggest challenges at the moment, right? Do you think that there is another side of it that we have become more ambitious than our resource base? Have we become more ambitious than our talent base?
Definitely not. I think the problems of private sector growth are structural. It's because it's a very difficult place to do business. And so that limits the growth, the investment that people are prepared to make, whether they're local people or foreign investors.
We'll come to that in detail in a while. Let me just move in a chronological manner. Then you started a charity here, right? After your deep spiritual awakening or whatever.
Yeah.
You were helping people in the Himalayas, right? In what ways?
So primarily education, and Dolma Ecotourism is a non-profit program. So tourists would come, we would run the trip. I would go on many myself, and the profits would go back into educating children from those villages that we visited. And then we got more and more donors for more and more children. We've had hundreds and hundreds of children get an education through this, almost all from the area of Rasuwa and Langtang National Park area. So that's really what we set out to do, is educate. A lot of those children eventually come to Kathmandu for the +2, or we also specialize in children with disabilities or Dalit children. There's a big Bika community in that area. So for children with disabilities, the special schools for blind, for example, we have a lot of blind students, will be in Kathmandu for their specialist needs. But that's what the charity does and did until the earthquake.
When we talk about education in Nepal, till primary education or till +2, I think it's okay. We must have an education. But when we deeply look at the level and the quality of higher education in Nepal, they are producing people, their curriculum or their quality is far below than the requirement of life. Life, existential realities of Nepal's life and what kind of people we are producing in our higher education have no link now, or very little link. Do you have any comment to that?
Yeah. The first thing I'll say that before
in that case, why should I go to college? Till 12, okay, I must learn how to read and write, and there is so much of our knowledge is available on the internet. But after 12, why should I go and waste my time in so many of the colleges that we have in the country?
I agree with you. A lot of the colleges and universities, if you look at the world rankings, they're not even on the world rankings. And I've never been to a Nepali university, I can't comment. But what I would say is you can overcome that as an individual. We have So we hire in our office for Dolma Impact Fund very specialist expert finance people. And some of those people come from the Nepali government universities. But I think that's because the individual strove to perhaps go outside of the curriculum. I know that's the case, and take separate exams, CFA exams, chartered accountant, etc. But there are also universities and colleges here which are accredited by foreign universities, by British, American, other universities. And I think they've taken, my niece actually went to one of those. She had a very different type, a much less rote learning and a much more participatory experience, interactive experience to learning, which is much more prepares you for life. So I think there are colleges in Nepal, if you can't afford to go abroad, there are colleges in Nepal which will give you that.
The degree.
But I want to touch on what I think is perhaps an even bigger limitation, and that's when we take students from a rural area and they come to +2 or university and they start in college, our dropout rate is very high, regardless of how clever those children are. And I've thought about this for a long time. But, you've got such a good result. You've got distinctions in your SEE, but you're dropping out at grade 11 or 12. How is that? And it's cultural. It's not because of the education gap. It's they don't want to put their hand up and ask questions when they're stuck. They feel a huge social gap. I'm from the village, and I'm in big Kathmandu, and it's not my right to ask questions. This, I can understand this. But we're really working hard now to overcome that. We're actually working for some of these children to get internships during their university or college holidays, to get internships in companies, so they feel like they belong in Kathmandu. And I think if we're going to get an inclusive society, we need to overcome that rural-urban divide, and make the rural students that come to Kathmandu feel like they belong.
Now let's move to another chapter of your life, the current chapter. In course of time, you started equity fund here, Dolma Fund, right?
Dolma Impact Fund.
Dolma Impact Fund, which is helping many entrepreneurs to grow, At what given point in your life you felt the need of such fund, and what was the turning point from your charity to move into this full-fledged business?
First of all, the charity is still running and at the top of its game, so I didn't switch as such. I still run Dolma Foundation. But there came a point in my life around 2011 where I could no longer live by being an investment banker, if you like, in the West, where I couldn't see the human impact of the work I was doing. It's not to say it was doing bad or good, it's just I didn't know.
Which bank you were working?
Oh, well, I worked before at JP Morgan. I was working actually for an American billionaire, was the last job I had, an American real estate billionaire, investing their money in Asia. But it wasn't human, but it was real estate. And I couldn't feel the human impact. So what I explained to you about this moment in Nepal where I sort of connected with humanity, and then I'm investing in real estate in Singapore, what difference is that going to make to anybody's life? How is that going to alleviate poverty? How is that going to improve education? And so I decided to do what some pioneers in India had done, like Avishkar Group, which is to set up an impact fund. What does that mean? An impact fund is an equity fund, a private equity fund. We're not trading shares on the stock exchange. We're investing in private companies. We're sitting on the board. We're helping with our expertise as well as the money we've invested to help them grow. And by doing so, creating certain positive impacts. And for us, those positive, we invest in 3 sectors: technology, healthcare, and energy. So what are the positive impacts that we measure? Employment is the most important for us. So we now generate through our investments almost 10,000 quality sustainable jobs in Nepal.
10,000 jobs
10,000 jobs
in Nepal?
in Nepal.
You're sure about it?
I'm sure about it.
Good.
Okay. 9,400 if you want the exact figures, almost 10,000.
That's good enough.
Okay. What's the benefit of investing in hospitals and pharmaceutical companies? Obviously, it's creating more beds, more nurses, more doctors, more better healthcare. It's providing local medicine manufacturers, substituting imports from India.
Which companies in Nepal you have invested?
In the technology sector, you might know Kathmandu.
Yeah. That brings food to us.
Exactly. Upaya City Cargo, which are third-party logistics. They are a technology platform aggregating the need for one business to ship something and the availability of trucks and vehicles to ship those goods. So helping trucks fill up before the journey. You might not know, though, some of the biggest companies in Nepal, Cloud Factory, Fuse Machines, they're artificial intelligence service companies which do AI work, artificial intelligence work mostly for American and European countries. They're not a brand because they don't, their customers
because their customers are not in Nepal.
But did you know that Cloud Factory employs about 4,500 people in Nepal?
This I didn't know.
And Fuse Machines, which started by a fascinating guy, Samir Maski, Nepali, moved to America, became American, got a PhD from Columbia. He's an assistant professor at Columbia in artificial intelligence software engineering, and started this company, Fuse Machines, so he could help employ and educate people in the very latest, hottest technology in Nepal. So these are some of the tech companies. We have investments in 2 hospitals. One I can't name because the deal is still going through. Rhododendron Biotech, which makes the hemodialysis fluid for kidney patients. And in energy, we have 3 hydropower investments, one of which just listed on the stock exchange, Sweat Ganga Hydropower. And we have the first private sector solar plant in Nepal, which is a beautiful looking thing near Pokhara, 5 megawatts.
Well, that's interesting. Where in Pokhara?
All I can tell you is it's a 1-hour drive on the road to Kathmandu from Pokhara.
5 megawatt.
5 megawatts.
That's interesting.
But I think solar is a very important part of the energy mix for Nepal to complement hydropower.
If you have to compare the investment climate here with other countries, how would you rate it? Is it very welcoming for an investor, or it is come see, come sa for an investor, or it's not good at all?
So there's a difference between policy and law and actual experience, right? If you look at the law, Nepal's quite an open economy. There don't laugh, it's true.
Yeah, no, when you look at the law, yes. I just was with a minister, you know.
I know.
So after so many years in journalism, I asked him a question. And he's a friend also. So he said that, Vijay, you want me to answer what is written in law, or you want me to answer the actualities? You know?
Yeah, exactly.
So his face just came to my mind. He was being very brutally honest with me.
It's not like the law stops so our fund we manage money for big European and American and multilateral like IFC banks and funds. And we are allowed to invest in most of the sectors we would be interested in. You know, not defense or tobacco, we wouldn't do that anyway. But when you come to actually bring money in, that's when the issues start. I think it's 7 signatures required to bring money in. Bear in mind, our investors are mostly ultimately European and American governments who own the money, what they call the ultimate beneficial owner. This is not dodgy money, right? It's about as clean as you get. It's the World Bank. It's the British government. It's, and yet you go through one department and you do the same thing with the next department and everybody sits and asks questions, and they really need to just allow the money in and let the banks who receive the money do the checks which are required, what they call anti-money laundering checks, which are valid. Everybody should be checked, including us, but not by lots of different people doing the same thing. And so that's just one example, but the time it takes to get a license, one of our hospitals is trying to get a license to expand to 100 beds. You'd think that would be easy given the demand for healthcare. It's been 6 months. And so, yes, it is very difficult in reality to do business here. It is very slow. And I think it comes back to what I said earlier about this gap between education and the jobs created by private sector. Yes, we've generated nearly 10,000 jobs. There's only one of us. There are some fantastic entrepreneurs that have done similar things, but on the whole, the private sector is not growing to meet the demands of the population. And that's why we're seeing so many people leave the country.
Just a quick question about the private sector in Nepal,
Yeah.
When you use this word called private sector, is it the real private sector, or it is we have upgraded family-owned business?
To me, it's the real private sector.
What is the difference between a real private sector and a family-owned business?
Nothing. Family-owned business is real private sector.
Okay.
I think some of the biggest innovations in the market are coming from some of the big family groups. I would also say that the younger generation of those family groups, which have perhaps gone abroad to get some work experience, advanced degrees, have come back. And I've got examples where they're corporatizing that family structure, making it a professional, perhaps hiring a CEO that's not from the family for one of the business units.
You mentioned that you need 7 signatures.
Yeah.
The 7 signature is a symbolic, right?
Yes.
It can be 17 or it can be 5.
Yes. There's a lot of unnecessary steps. Yeah.
Compared to Nepal, can you name a country which is quicker to invest? Say, for example, India.
Yeah.
How many signatures you would need? If
Zero.
you take,
Zero. 0 signatures. They have what's called an automatic route for foreign investment. To attract foreign investment, there used to be something called I can't remember, a group that had to approve foreign investments. And you still need approval for investments in things like defense. Actually, particularly at the moment, you need Chinese investment to have approval. But if you're not Chinese and you're not investing in the defense sector, you simply sign an agreement with a company in
Now,
India.
be specific. How many signatures you need in India
0.
compared to Nepal?
7.
In India, 0.
0. You sign a deal with a company and you send the money the next day. It's in their bank account. And then that money goes to work, employing people, building factories, creating technology. And what we find is that when you apply to bring money into Nepal, investment money, you start at the Department of Industry, and the central bank at the end of that process records the actual money coming in. The average difference between the amount applied for and the money coming in is about 50%. That means 50% give up. 50% of people who had signed a legal document saying, I'm going to invest in Nepal.
But they get tired on the way.
Not people who thought, it would be an idea to invest in Nepal, but people have done the work, negotiated a deal, they give up. And that is so sad, because that is hundreds of millions of dollars which could have gone into creating employment.
Wow.
I'll tell you one other thing.
It's so strange that Nepal, which is such a peaceful country and that gave you the spiritual awakening, but also makes people very, very tired if you are an investor, right?
Look, I mean, for us, it is much less of a problem. I knew all about this. You know, I started Dolma Impact Fund. I knew what it was like. I'd done some business here through non-profit. I knew everything was going to be difficult. But, you know, so it's fine. We are set up to deal with that. And a lot of the people are lovely. You know, you sit and have a chat and a cup of tea with the bureaucrats, and you know, it's not any individual.
Let me rephrase this question for you. If you take money to Bangladesh, how many signatures?
I don't know. I've never invested
in India, 0, which is our nearest neighbor. You're sure about it, right?
Put it like this: I've never known any other country to require any signatures. There are some, but I haven't invested in them.
Okay.
But the normal way to invest as a foreigner in the UK or India or Singapore or Malaysia.
Let me just Tim. Now comes the vital question. On one hand, there is so much of unemployment in this country. And on the other hand, we are asking for 7 signatures.
Mm-hmm.
And even the person who genuinely wants to bring money here and has signed an initial agreement, by the time he reaches NRB, he gets tired. Half of them get tired.
Tired, or the company's changed, or the valuation has changed, or the project has changed. Many reasons. Because those 7 signatures, by the way, it's taken us up to 13 months from signing and agreeing to invest to actually getting the final approval to invest.
Wow.
Some of it's 3 months, but it has taken up to 13 months.
But for an investor, simply put, this is not a good place to invest.
It's a difficult place to get all of the extra signatures and things required. But I don't think it's true to say this isn't a good place to invest.
I'll rephrase my question. This might be a good place to invest, but that's too much of a hassle.
Too much hassle. The companies, the entrepreneurs, the markets are fantastic. But to get through all these extra approvals that other countries don't have means that a lot of companies and investors don't come in.
Everything in law is just fine, right?
It's fine. I mean,
that's why I laugh.
There could be some enhancements, but I don't think that's the
Yeah,
problem. I think it's the implementation of the law.
What could be the root cause of it? Can you describe it in a line?
No, I think it's too complicated. And I'd also rather not, you know, I am a Nepali join.
Joins up. Oh, yeah. That's why you can be frank, you know.
But this is not my country. So I don't want to make any political, and I don't think it is a political thing. I think it is the genuine fear of things out there, if you like. I was in India this week, and I'm not saying it's, you know, because of the history with Britain, but definitely India has been part of the trading world for hundreds of years. It is aware, it's not quite so fearful. You know, what might immigration bring? What might foreign investment bring? You know, are they going to steal everything? Are they going to... And so there is a genuine fear of the world because perhaps of a lack of historical interaction or trade with the world outside of this immediate area. This is just a possible hypothesis. I mean, you asked me the question. I don't truly know the answer. But I do think some of the people whose signatures are required are genuinely worried and trying to protect the country. But in doing so, they're actually, you know, if you let money come in, there will be some crooks, right? But if you don't let any money in, there won't be any crooks, but there won't be any real money either. So if you like, I think definitely some of those people are trying to do the right thing, but not understanding really what international business is like. Who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys?
They might be fearing something which is not there, you know. Or
that's my point. That's my point.
Or as you said, if you open up the windows, there will be mosquitoes will also come and the fresh air will also come. It's a philosophical question.
Absolutely right.
Do you open
But
the window
also,
or no?
you learn how to deal with the bad guys, right?
Yeah.
So you asked me about India. Why is there 0 signatures to send foreign investment? Because first of all, the banks that receive the money do the checking on behalf of the central bank, right? So they are checked. If that money is found to be from a source that is corrupt or money laundering, they will, I think they have a 30-day period. They can kick that money out again.
Okay.
So they still have some protection. But what they do is they get the money in first before they decide, for goodness sake, we need to develop our country. Let's get the money. Mm-hmm. If we don't like it, we'll kick it out. We'll still do those checks. But it's not the government doing those checks. It's the banks receiving it. And if they fail at those checks, they can lose their banking license. Now, that is beginning. That is beginning in Nepal. For certain types of companies, brand new companies, I believe you can now do this so-called automatic route. So we are seeing some signs of change, especially from the central bank.
But the pace of reform should be as fast as the change in technology.
And it's also very timely because we can see what happened in Sri Lanka. They ran out of foreign currency. Now, I don't think Nepal is anywhere near that kind of problem. Nepal's external debt is much lower with a much lower interest rate. But foreign exchange reserves are going down. And the one area of foreign exchange, because it's so difficult to invest in the country, which is tiny, which is untapped, is foreign direct investment. So I think the central bank fully understand that. And I am seeing moves now to increase the amount of foreign investment to make it perhaps a little bit easier so that there is more US dollars sitting in the bank to cover those imports that are now more expensive.
I remember talking to one finance minister, former finance minister, not very long ago. Our ministers keep on changing very fast. So I asked him, what will happen in case if we open FDI? Let everybody bring money here.
What was his answer?
The finance minister told me that if we open it up, we don't know what kind of money will come. All crooks or this money or that money or bad money might come. And he said that maybe the World Bank or IMF would, he literally used the word, they will strangle us probably. Luckily, I am a friend of the current World Bank guy here, Faris.
Yes, I know Faris.
I asked him that, will you strangle us if we bring money like that? He said, this is all rubbish, Of course, there has to be checks,
Yes.
So I'm not very sure. I'm not an economist, but as a lay person, I really do not understand at a time when there is so much of a gap and it is increasing every day between the graduates which we are producing from our schools and the colleges and the increased population and the jobs available in this country, That critical point, why we are not changing our attitude, our philosophical outlook towards FDI.
Yeah, and I wish I could answer that question. I think that fear.
There is a genuine fear.
There is a fear.
That answer from that particular finance minister is not one person. It is an institutional fear that has been growing.
I agree. And what I think is that if a law has been made or a regulation passed that you are allowed to invest in, say, hydropower, which you can, speed it up. Get rid of all of this stuff. Do what India do. Let the money in. Let the banks do the checks. The banks are probably better and more qualified at checking the source of the money than the people in the Department of Industry or the central bank. Let it in. But I also don't think that Nepal, I'm not a complete laissez-faire capitalist, right? I think Nepal should retain some protections for example, you're not allowed to trade, as a foreign investor, you're not allowed to buy shares on the stock exchange. You can't be a hedge fund trader. And I probably agree with that, right? You don't want this hot money, not in this early cycle of development. You saw the Asian crisis of 97, where the hot money, where Thailand, did open up, and then things went wrong, and that sucking sound of money leaving. So I think it's perfectly reasonable also to have certain controls on the currency. I think it's very important to keep the peg with India. And that might not agree with the complete liberal capitalist, but I think that development, if you look at South Korea as a wonderful example, they didn't just open up on day one. They opened up gradually. They made sure that their companies had some protection first, and could compete before they opened up completely. And while it's different protections in Nepal, I actually agree that we are, for example, we're not allowed to take our money out, even if we sold the shares, for at least a year. I don't mind that sort of restriction. Okay, I think it adds economic stability. I don't think foreigners today, maybe in the future when this is a developed country, but I don't think foreigners today should be able to trade shares on the stock exchange. So the answer is not just open everything to everyone. The answer is you've got the laws in place. If you've decided to take money in certain sectors, take it, get it in the bank, get it to work creating jobs.
Let me play devil's advocate with you for a while. Tim, while trying to sympathize with what you have said, and while totally agreeing with the need to cut down those 7 or 17 signature, there is another side to it. And you are our Jwai Sap also. Nepal is a small country. We have very little historical experience about international trade, as you just mentioned. And geostrategically, we are also in a very, very sensitive position. So if we open up everything, and the money is a power these days. Money is not just a financial power these days. It is a political power, it is a media power. We are just hearing the news, NDTV being taken over by Mr. Adani, that's coming.
Yes, I saw that.
So, there comes a question that can we, while agreeing with you, there is a sense of fear even in my mind, coming from Berkeley, an open university, that how much we should allow it to open and how much we have to be a little conservative.
Well, again, I come back to, I think, for example, I'm not sure about this because we don't invest in media companies, but I think there is a restriction already on foreign direct investment in the media, newspapers, TV, etc.
I'm just talking about if the money comes to Nepal, it can be very easily siphoned from one sector to another sector, And this is a country where the private sector's big business tycoons is not very, very impressive. You might not forget that one of our richest man was caught by police during that COVID for blackmailing thermometers, which is a pathetic thing, Such a rich man and just... And if the money comes in a big scale, who knows, it might not be siphoned for the political purposes and other purposes.
I think
there's a bit of skepticism, and I'm playing the devil's advocate also.
Sure.
India is a huge country. Its absorptive capacity to digest is much, much higher. You put $20 billion in India, it will be just like this,
I think, first of all, Nepal is not a small country. 30 million people is the size of Malaysia. Secondly, there are lots of smaller countries which allow foreign direct investment. Belgium, the Netherlands, these are smaller in population than Nepal, which have exactly the same worries, and they manage them. The UK is a much bigger country. Actually, it's only just over double the population of Nepal. It's not a much bigger country. But let me give you some examples. The concern about Chinese security worries of Chinese technology firms investing in the UK. So the UK effectively prevented Huawei from participating in its 5G mobile networks. Okay, so there's an example of a bigger country. You've got India at the moment worried about all Chinese. Now, I said 0 signatures, but if you're a Chinese investor, it's probably many signatures, and probably you're not allowed to invest at all because of that same fear. So, I don't think the answer is to open up to everything all of a sudden. I think the answer is to have your limitations. If you have a geopolitical or security disagreement, you should, and many countries do, restrict capital for those sort of security or media domination or that kind of thing. But where you have agreed to invest in energy and technology, you should allow that.
Yeah. Now I'm fine.
You should allow that.
Whatever is written in the...
Nepal will learn how to manage. Nepal, like every single country in the world, has security worries, has geopolitical relationships, and it needs to manage that. And some of that will be to do with investments, and that will have some restrictions. You are seeing now a great example of that with Nepal's exports of energy to India. It's a wonderful thing Nepal is able to export some of its surplus power, but India is saying, if that power is generated with Chinese investment, I'm sorry, but we're not taking it. So what does that do? It means Chinese investors are probably not going to invest because there's nowhere to sell the power. So you can see this playing out with Nepal as the sort of middleman between India and China's concerns. So this is completely normal. Tell me a country which has no geopolitical concerns about capital or companies investing in their country that could create a security concern.
Yeah, just because there are complexities involved.
Yeah. Doesn't mean you should enforce impoverishment of the people.
That doesn't mean that we should not open up the window.
Exactly.
Now, shall I open up the window just because that the mosquito will be coming? Mosquito will come, right?
That's right.
But so will the fresh air,
That's what a beautiful analogy.
In that case, first I will bring an mosquito repellent in my room.
Exactly, and then you learn how to manage the mosquitoes, yes. We have coils everywhere.
Yeah.
The windows are open.
Now, Tim, you have seen the entrepreneurs all over the world. I'm not talking about the big ones, I'm talking about the small size, medium size entrepreneurs, young people, talents. How would you compare their talent with the rest of the world or in this region? People who want to do something new, original.
Equal. Absolutely equal. In terms of ambition, talent, and I say that particularly in the technology space. What is not equal, and you've already touched on this, is education. So, first let me tell you what I think the opportunity of technology is for the world, not just for Nepal. Is that this digital revolution we're in now doesn't require physical infrastructure, except, of course, the internet. Nepal and other developing countries were not able to participate in the steam engine revolution, the manufacturing revolution, because the roads, the water, the power, it couldn't compete. It didn't have the physical infrastructure. And so what we saw is world inequality growing. What the digital revolution, which only requires broadband and mobile data, which here, by the way, is really pretty good. What's the difference? What do I need? What's the difference between an entrepreneur in California or Kathmandu? Actually, nothing.
The capital base of a Nepali capital base.
And education. So I want to tell you how one company is solving the education gap. You've said, yes, they're not, local universities are not MIT or Harvard, creating artificial intelligence engineers. Here's what Fuse Machines, one of our companies, is doing. It sets up a one-year program for Nepali computer science graduates. It uses the content from Columbia University and their own training engine to do a year's foundation course to upgrade them to where they can actually work within American teams, alongside American teams. But now, of course, with the cloud, with the internet, with COVID, which has made working from home and working with remote teams much more normal, and if you can bridge that education gap, I'm telling you from personal experience, there is zero difference between the talent in California or Kathmandu.
If you ask me personally, and if I have to name one thing, it will be the capital, lack of capital.
Yes.
Rather than education.
Yes.
So how would we solve that?
By the very things we've been talking about. And that is what we're doing. So we may be one of the first foreign investors in technology, but what I hope is that we set a trend.
We need more and more venture capitalists like you, actually.
That's right. And I think, here's the thing. We talk about the 7 signatures, the symbolic 7 signatures. We're okay with that. We've got an office in Kathmandu. I know the finance secretary and I can talk to people. I can get meetings with the British ambassador. I can, they're never not approved, right? They get done. The problem is we're only, under $100 million, which sounds like a lot of money, but Nepal needs foreign direct investment to meet its SDG, Sustainable Development Goals, of about $2 to $3 billion a year. Nepal currently gets 1 to 200 million in FDI. So it's not just Dolma and IFC and FMO and some of the sort of government-backed foreign investors. It needs to be.
But to
JP
cut you
Morgan.
short, if I have to ask you a question, what is the difference between Nepali talent and the talent abroad? You say they are equal in terms of talent.
Absolutely.
But what segregates them, and that's what makes it all different, and will continue to make the difference, is the capital formation.
Capital and education.
Education.
But you know what? Education can be bridged by what, for example, by training programs. Education can be bridged.
What would be your one word answer to the capital? What it can be done?
Automatic route.
What?
Automatic route. Copy India. 0 signatures.
Okay.
Get rid of the barriers. Let the entrepreneur in Nepal speak directly to foreign investors without fear that the bureaucracy will stop the capital, delay the capital. Let the entrepreneur speak to the world because they're just as good as anybody else.
7 signatures is a wonderful.
We're using that.
Yeah. Maybe we should write a book called 7 Signatures in Nepal. Maybe I should write that. I don't have a background in economics, otherwise I would have written it, 7 signatures. Then comes another question, Nepal's geographical positioning is between India and China. It's very, very difficult for anything that we produce here to be competitive. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that. I agree with that from a manufacturing perspective. Yeah. I have huge admiration. And there are some businesses, and I won't name them, which are competing and exporting, but not many. Okay, so you have a problem of scale. So you can't scale. If you're competing with, say, Johnson & Johnson, a massive multinational who's manufacturing in India and China and sending in, face cream or whatever they make.
Presence of India in China theoretically, technically, philosophically makes it impossible for many industries to flourish in this country.
But it's not just the scale, it's the lack of infrastructure, right? So if I have to have a diesel generator on backup, if I have to dig my own borehole for water because the government doesn't provide it, if the bumpy roads mean a high proportion of my products break on the way, this is driving a lack of competition. So it isn't just scale. You could be a niche manufacturer, you're brilliant at your game, but without the surrounding infrastructure, it's very, very difficult for you to compete. Some are competing, but it is very difficult.
What are the changes, positive and the negative, you have seen in Nepalese business scenario or the entrepreneurs or the industrialists over the last so many years you have been coming?
I think it's the culture of governance. I think there's a culture of entrepreneurship flooding through the world which doesn't recognize national barriers. It's usually connected to technology, not always, but there's a growing, whether or not people have been abroad and experienced it, they are aware of it. And so I am seeing more awareness of reporting requirements, just better management. There's definitely been an improvement. We've been investing in Nepal now for 8 years. And in that time, there's a great awareness of, for example, equity investors like us, what sort of things we need, more sophistication. So at the level of the entrepreneur, the management, the technical skills, I've definitely seen a great improvement. I don't think the problem has anything to do with the talent and ability of Nepalis. Nothing to do with it. In fact, I've been incredibly impressed since coming here with financing.
Over the years, do you see the business environment or the Nepalese entrepreneur or industrialist level of working or their professionalism increasing or decreasing, or more or less they are the same where they were compared to the rest of the world? Are we catching up with the world, or we are being left behind in the competition? Because we are not only the one who is growing,
That is a really important question, especially at this time. I talked about the opportunity for technology companies to scale because there's no infrastructure barrier. So it's now or never. Are you going to catch up with equality, or are you going to let yourself get even further behind? I think that a lot of this, there is a very positive impact of foreign investment, and that is competition. So let's look at the banking sector. What happened in the 1980s? In comes some foreign banks or investors, Standard Chartered, joint ventures from the Middle East. And what has happened is those banks have...
They've changed the culture, I agree.
They've changed not just within their own companies, but within the central bank and within the competing domestic banks. Do you ever... I do not personally experience corruption, for example, in banks. I think that competitiveness with ethical foreign investors, and they're not all ethical, but I think Standard Chartered probably is. So I think letting...
Well, fully agreeing with you, corruption in Nepalese bank is in a slightly subtle way. We will talk about it
Okay,
some other
perhaps
time.
I haven't experienced it, but it's certainly...
But one thing I totally agree with you, that the private sector banking has brought a fantastic new culture which was not there before. When I was a young kid, I would go with my uncle to the bank. To take his own money, it would require us 3 hours. First we would go, we would take a token.
That's right.
Line up, queue up for a token. Then once the token comes, then we go to another line. Like your 7 signatures, there were 3 lines we have to go.
Yeah.
Now it can be done in no time.
And do you think that would have happened if Standard Chartered and others hadn't entered the market?
No, I think they have a definitive contribution to it.
Exactly. So what we're talking about is that to enable Nepali businesses to catch up, you've got to allow foreign competition in so that they can compete with that benchmark. If you overprotect, then you run the risk of there not being competition to help lift local
Or you might be
companies
left
up.
behind in the race forever.
It's not happened with banking. Standard Chartered are competing head to head, and some of the local banks are doing even better.
Tim, what do you think about the climate change and the impact it will have on our life, with reference to the first time when you came to Nepal and you find your peace of your mind and had a glimpses of...
I think the peace comes as much from the enormity of the Himalayan scenery as the cultures in the valleys. The climate change risk for Nepal is much greater than most countries because of the melting glaciers. And this is happening for 2 reasons. One is greenhouse gases, we all know about. The world is warming up. And it doesn't matter for greenhouse gases if a power station is in the UK or next to the Himalayas, it's going to warm the globe. But another thing that's happening here is something called black carbon, or basically soot. Soot from the coal-fired power stations across the border in India, soot from the lorries burning diesel here, soot from people burning firewood because they haven't got enough electricity to light and heat their homes. And
People in Chung Valley was telling me that the smoke coming from Tibet is also melting them.
absolutely. And so if you look at the concentration of black carbon, it's terrifying. I could show you a map. It's all concentrated on the Himalayan glaciers, and that darkens the snow and, of course, attracts more heat. And that is something we can do something about. Okay, we could do that quickly. We can stop buying as much coal-fired power from India, which when we import, that's mostly produced by coal. We can therefore produce more renewable energy in Nepal and in the dry season especially, and there are technologies like solar and battery that can achieve that. We can
The
also
trouble here is that
electrify.
once you are living an existential life, there are two kind of people in this world. On one hand, we have got hand-to-mouth people.
Yeah.
I have to be more careful. I can't think of climate change if I have to.
No, but they're not the people polluting.
Trouble here is that they are not the people polluting, but the lecture is being given to them.
Yes, they're the people who, sure, they might burn a fire at night. That's the worst they're doing. But compare that to the mega coal-fired power stations in Bihar. And it's that little fire in the village. Trust me, it doesn't make any difference.
Now, if you ask Indians, then they will say that these Europeans had already done it, and why should we stop? We should also pollute for less 20 years. Then we'll be at par with them.
And I understand all those arguments, but this
There
is
are arguments, but
climate change in Nepal is right now. The crisis is right now. My family coming down from Dunshe the other day, half the road just disappeared.
Yeah.
And this is happening all the time. The landslides, we can see it.
this is something that we are facing without we being responsible for it.
But by the way, it isn't just us that are suffering. It's all the bordering states of India where our rivers run and the floods are going. It's all of Bangladesh. It's the whole floodplain of South Asia, which is suffering from the melting glaciers. So it should be the joint effort of some of the South Asian nations to prevent the glaciers from melting. And we can, if we get together and replace this coal-fired power with renewable energy.
What kind of future you see the world is awaiting?
Whoa, these are big questions. I think you and I agree on a sort of inner set. What do we want? We want to be happy. A Rinpoche once said this to me. What is your religion? He was talking to an atheist friend of mine, and he said, what religion are you? And my friend said, I'm an atheist. I don't believe in any God. He said, do you want to be happy? And my friend said, yes. And the Rinpoche said, well, there's your religion. You want to be happy. If we want to be happy, what is happy? There's a level of wealth, of development, which is probably Nepal needs more of. I think technology can assist that. And by, for example, just taking time out of your daily work on chores, freeing you up to either work or have more leisure time. And I think this is what we can look forward to. I think some of the most exciting things happening are in healthcare, DNA, personalized medicine, not medicine that's made to cure the disease in the average person, because the average person doesn't exist, but specifically made medicine for the individual's DNA. And so I think we can see longevity and hopefully quality of life improve across the world.
For some people.
If we can afford it, and that comes down to our economic development in Nepal. But I think there are also great risks of our completely interconnected world, somebody stealing data, doing wrong things. You're seeing cybercrime increasing dramatically. So I think as we go into this, the very same world that gives us these benefits of free time, of medicine, and therefore our health records held in databases online brings with them
What are the
risks.
chances of mankind going nut and blowing this whole civilization?
I think we've come. We've come as close to that in the last 6 months as we have since the Cuban Missile Crisis. I don't know, but that risk remains, and as long as nuclear weapons remain, that risk will be there. We've recently seen, of course, the standoff between Russia and NATO over Ukraine. There was a period where we were worried in the UK. You know, what if a missile landed over into the NATO border by mistake? Luckily not.
In a way, we are having the finest and the most comfortable time in human history, and probably the most delicate and the most sensitive time in the human history, right?
Yes, I think so. With progress comes risk. But I think that's a really important point. It's very important for us to look at where we are today. We can point out some of the problems to make the future better. But if you look back and just look at longevity and how much we're living, even in Nepal, look at education. And you can't say education's a bad thing, even if you have to go abroad to use that education. We've really progressed as a society.
I don't think that we have any political or economic solution to the world unless we add a spiritual dimension to it. Do you have any comment to that?
Yes, I do.
If you don't like to use the word called spiritual, you might say that unless we add a humanistic dimension to the...
Yes.
Because all the time the discussions are confined to political solution or the economic solutions or the military solutions. But we are missing the core, that is the spiritualistic aspect. And if you don't like to use that word spiritual, you might use the humanistic way of looking at things. You know, if you spiritualistic dimension, unless we add a spiritualistic dimension to it, the world has no future. If I say that, what would be your comment?
I think this is somewhere where Nepal and all of Asia perhaps is ahead. Western Europe, where I live, is extremely secular, you know, non-religious, non-spiritual. And I talked earlier about the stress you can feel and almost touch. And I sometimes wonder if that is part of it. It doesn't matter whether you're Christian, Buddhist, Hindu, Muslim, but it's almost uncool to be spiritual, or certainly to be Christian in the UK, for example. And I think that's a problem. I'll tell you a story. My vicar, my priest at the church down the road, knocked on my door one day, and Pooja, my wife, is in her shrine, and in her shrine she's got Hindu gods, she's got Buddhist gods, she's got a picture of Jesus Christ. You know, we're a multi-faith family, right? And we take influences from multi-religions. I was so embarrassed. The Christian priest is coming to the door. He's going to see all these Hindu gods and, you know, Buddhist things. And oh my God, what's he going to say? And I invited him in and he saw that and he said, that's fantastic. He said, that is so spiritual and that's what we're lacking in this country. I don't mind if people come to my church or go to a Hindu temple, but I want more spirituality in this country. And I do think we are missing that in the West. And I think here it's very natural for us to have this conversation. It's very natural for people to compare the guru that they're following or the particular path they're interested in. That wouldn't happen in the UK.
All I was trying to say that unless we add a humanistic dimension, world doesn't have any future. The world will not have a good future. Our world will not have a little bit of...
I think world won't have any meaning.
Yeah, meaning.
You might have a mechanical, perfect economy, technology future, but it would have no meaning, so what's the point?
Do you think that the life has a meaning?
Yes.
What is the meaning?
Love. Love. And I mean that in the broadest sense, right? I think God or your version of spirituality is love when you boil it down. And that is love, you know, perhaps for your wife, that is love for your family, but it's also love for mankind. It's love for animals, it's love for nature. And that's the way I define it.
In my last book, there is a line, you know, they say, Maya ठुलो हो. Love is big. सबैभन्दा ठुलो. Bigger than anything. Bigger than any success. Bigger than any failure.
I fully agree.
I have run out of questions after that. You said it in a line.
But isn't that right? Isn't that right? I sometimes think love is the only truth. And around the truth, we construct these mathematical structured lives. When we're born, we only know the truth. Right? We're not filtered. Then we go through school and work and we learn all these structures and we've got to make money and we've got to pay the mortgage and then you fall in love with a woman, say, and that whole stuff goes out of the window. You know, love is the most important thing. It completely, and it's irrational. It's completely impractical sometimes, but it's far more powerful than all those structured things you're doing. And I think what it is it's a window to truth. And then, you know, perhaps your father dies. That's love too. It's the love, the grief that you feel. All of that stuff goes out of the window. It's much more powerful than anything you were worried about the day before he died. And so every time love pierces our structured world that we've built around us, we see truth.
Lovely. Such a joy to talk to you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you very
Dhanyavad.
much. Dhanyavad.